Hello, hey, this is Russ Payton with Role Playing Public Radio, and we're doing Actual Play Podcasting 101 here at Gencon 2024. I use the announcer voice in case somebody not had their coffee this morning. So, welcome to this panel. I will introduce all my guests, and then I'll talk a little bit about the fundamentals of if you want to do an actual play podcast, consider these things, and then we'll basically, I imagine all of you have a lot of questions about what you want to do, so we'll just answer questions the best we can. I'm Russ Payton. I run Role Playing Public Radio, RPPR Actual Play, and Leto Narrative Dissidents, which is an RPG review podcast. I also have another one called Night Click Radio, which is a vaporwave / electronic music review podcast. My solution in life is just start another podcast, bro. I also write and design RPGs. Caleb.
Hi, I'm Caleb Stokes. I write for Arctream Publishing as a freelancer, and I also run my own RPG publication studio called Heaven Games. I've written games like Red Markets and Phase Anatomy, and I've written God's Teeth recently for Arctream. And I do actual play podcasts on Patreon under Heaven Games Open Design for my own stuff, and under Delta Green Dead Channels for Arctream Publications.
So, Rob.
Hello, this is Rob Stith from the Orpheus Protocol. I created a game called the Orpheus Protocol and a podcast called the Orpheus Protocol. We play the Orpheus Protocol.
It's good SEO.
I'll have a lot of advice about mistakes not to make in actual play podcasting that I made.
And I'm Ethan Cordray. I'm with the Technical Difficulties Gaming Podcast. We are just a straight up actual play podcast. That's all we do all the time, except for occasionally we talk about comic books and movies and stuff, but primarily it's all AP, and we do everything remotely over Discord.
Yeah, so we have a mixture of online and in-person recording podcasts. There's a lot of formats. So if you want to start an actual play podcast, I think the first thing you need to know is you need to get used to the sound of your own voice. Most people do not like hearing their own voice recorded, but if you're starting the podcast, you're probably the one going to be editing it, and you're probably going to listen to yourself say and it's things of that nature, filler words for many, many hours. So you need to get used to that. And actual play podcasting can be very rewarding, can be very fun, but it is a lot of work. It's also a marathon, not a sprint. It's an ongoing project. So think, even if you're doing seasons and a limited run, it's not something you're going to finish in a day or a week or a month, probably. And so keep that in mind. And I think also just, when you start the podcast, think about what your goals are. There's all kinds of different goals. Like maybe you're playtesting writing your own game, you want to develop that. Maybe you want to try out different role-playing games and experience that. And maybe you want to try a more, edited radio serial style storytelling. There's a lot of different, things you can do with an actual play, but you need to think about those goals and have sort of a good, honest perspective of how much time and energy you can put into it and what you expect to get back. So, it like any other long-term creative project. So that would be my big but get used, and if you're doing video, get used to looking at your own face, because you're going to be editing it. So, because a lot of people will show up and help and volunteer, especially to record the games, because that's fun, but not as many people are going to help you editing it and marketing it and dealing with web hosting and, podcast hosting, the technical, more work stuff. So,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there we go. We'll just get each of them to give one piece of advice. So, Caleb, what's your top piece of advice for actual play podcasting?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I know this is Actual Play 101, but I came into the space after you did, but still pretty early compared to the Actual Play movement.
Yeah.
And at this point, it's like writing 101, but I don't have a genre. I'm giving you advice to write a grocery list or a novel or a comic book because actual play has just exploded in diversity and what is actually defined as it now. So much like Ross, I would carefully consider my material conditions if I was starting today, and carefully consider the kind of product I'm going to envision as an actual play I want to do. because I'll see people on Twitter just being like, well, I need 300,000 in startup funds to buy my studio. And I'm like, okay, man, I don't do that job. Like, I've never approached anything like that level of sophistication, but that is an actual play to hundreds of thousands of people. But you can also do something around the table. You can do something around the table that's more scripted, but less production value-y. So my main advice, if I were starting off today, would be like, define the kind of show you want to make, because that's going to have, because whether if I'm recording it in person or recording it online versus a certain number of people versus one-on-one, that's going to drastically change what you're investing into it, the equipment you're going to need, the skills you're going to need to learn. Because, like, if you want to ask me how to put on Critical Role, I know nothing about that.
You just need a camera and a mic.
Yeah, that's all it takes. Get Joe Maggiano on the phone.
One camera, one mic. That's it.
One mic.
Yeah,
Call my buddy Vin Diesel to come over. Yeah. I would say define the kind of show you're shooting for, because to learn everything you could possibly need to do it would be like drastically inefficient, and it would certainly kill my enthusiasm for the process. So I would pick your area and your shot first, which is something we can approach through questions, I think, as we go on. But yeah.
Rob.
I would say the number one thing that you should know or work out with yourself is why you want to do this and for whom are you doing it. Because there's a huge difference between the experience of maybe the best at-the-table role-playing game you've ever played in your life that gives you memories that last your whole life, and on the other hand, a narrative product that an external audience is going to enjoy and is formatted properly for them to have a good experience with. The way that you play, the way that you make decisions, even aside from all the extra work you have to do, it's quite different on a process level, making a good episode of an actual play podcast versus running a really good session of a role-playing game. So you need to, more or less in the cliche way, have a story that you need to tell. Because if you are not like obsessed with this story finding an audience, why don't you just play a game? Like, we're allowed to play games. Playing games is good. I feel like a lot of us in this room probably enjoy that. It's important to be serving like a genuine need that you have, and not just succumbing to this sort of like hustle culture, monetize your hobbies bullshit that's poisoned the soul of America. I have some other advice, but that's the big one, is like, does the thing that you want to do serve its best purpose in the form of an actual play podcast, as opposed to just playing the game, because those are very different.
The most important part of actual play podcasting is starting drop shipping.
Ethan.
Yeah, so I'm gonna play off of what everybody said so far and just put it in terms of if you're going to create something like this, you need to be able to create something that is going to be as fun as possible for you to make. Because you're not going to be, I mean, even if you're pretty successful, even if you get like an audience and you got your Patreon going and everything, at some point, like, you could get a job that would make more money than this. So if you're doing this, you're doing it because it's fun for you to do it. Obviously, not every part of it's going to be fun. Not every minute of editing is going to be a good time, put a smile on your face. But if at the end of the day, like, you don't feel like, I'm really glad that I'm producing this thing. Mm-hmm. I'm having a great time every time. I look forward to playing these games that I'm going to be recording for people. I'm excited for people to hear what I'm putting out, that sort of thing. That sort of emotional commitment to it, like, make a show that gives you that joy and that pleasure, because if you aren't feeling that, you're going to stop doing it. And a lot of people stop doing it, and that's why they do it. It's because they get burned out, or they just get busy, and it's not a top priority for them, which is all fine, because if it's a show that if it's a product that you're not enjoying anymore, and it's a chore and not an enjoyable thing that you're working on, do something else that does give you joy. Like, no shame in that.
Yeah.
Time for last episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually plays into a note that I have here that says you can more easily make money by finding it abandoned in a big sack with a dollar sign. So if money is a concern for the actual play thing, you have barked up so many wrong trees that you're in a different forest where the trees are made of dogs.
I mean, like for me, one of the biggest rewards of actual play podcasts, is definitely not the money. It's the there are moments in games that we have preserved that one, now we talk about them because they were recorded, and other people have commented on them. I can just bring up shark fighting to the RPPR community, and like everybody's like there's and that that game was recorded like for a decade ago. But it'll live forever, unlike Aaron's character.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Keep telling yourself that. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't find this immensely satisfying to do. But yeah, it is a lot of work. But so that's sort of our little preamble to give you like some a framework to think about doing an actual play podcasting. But yeah, I hope you all have questions. So
Started the podcast. It's the second one. I think I started initially when about the same time you guys did, way back when.
Yeah.
Then had kids.
Yeah. Well, wow.
That's another reason.
Yeah.
Started
Or are they old enough to get on the
pandemic-ish time because I wanted to play.
Yeah.
And one of the things that when you're playing online, what you run into is there's no crosstalk. There's no side talks. How do you handle that? Like, is there a way to handle side conversations when you're playing online, or is it, do you just play differently?
We do play. So the question is, how do you handle crosstalk? And when we mean crosstalk, is like whenever you're playing in person, people, the GM is handling something for one player and the other players are having a little side conversation. And there's a lot of different approaches to that. Some actual play podcasts remove as much extraneous material as possible and focus only on the story, the narrative, and the rules, and even like how many rules are in there. And then there's some, they're just like, it's what we did. It's what we talked about. So in online games, a lot of that crosstalk becomes like text chat, right? Like you're playing in Discord or whatever you're using, and people are then messaging each other and doing that. So you can't really like record audio for that separately. That kills the spontaneity, which is sort of the point of it. If you're doing one thing so if you were doing like a video thing, you could, if you wanted to put a lot of work in, get those text chats and put them up on the video, like on the YouTube version.
Insert shots.
Yeah, insert shot. Yeah. That is. I mean, some of the side talk becomes just like part of it, just briefly rules, tangents, and that kind of thing. So,
So I would say that that's one of those ideas where having a product in mind, like, I don't know, my favorite film directors are renowned for like, Hitchcock is renowned for editing in the shot. Like he doesn't go to the editing floor. He doesn't get a million B-rolls. He knows what it should look like. He gets the shot and he moves on. Anything you can do for that audio-wise is going to save you an exponential amount of time. So like, I understand not wanting to be the Discord cop. Be like, shut the hell up, Terry. We just, like the Deadpool Wolverine references are going to remain topical for 1 week after I post this, and then it's going to be an enormous distraction from the climax of our game. And if you can put that more nicely and be like, guys, for every time we go off on these tangents, you've added 30 minutes to my editing. And you can just be, and it's not like we're not going to talk about it. It's going to be like, oh, we're talking about it now. Let me put in a note so I just know to kill, 30 to 35 before we get back, and I can do, and just typing in note, cut, note, in cut, if you in whatever recording software you have, is going to save you an hour of time on that regard. Miking people individually, if you're recording in person, if you need to just kill a track because somebody's like, I don't know how my character works, things like that. That is so much faster than, I'm kind of picking him up on mic 2 and kind of picking him up on mic 4, so I can kill mic 3, but then I got this sort of shadow conversation on either of these two people talking. Telling your players that like if you book like a 4 hour of time and you're not going to put a 4 hour podcast up because nobody's going to listen to it, telling your players like, hey, after an hour, I'm just going to find an act point. We're going to do the outro. Like that's the thing that we're done. Like we're going to pack up and leave. Then everyone's going to go get a bathroom break. We're going to do the intro again. I'm just going to keep it running. And then we're just going to keep doing the episode because now we're into act 2 of whatever the adventure is. And you can do that in post. Like you can be like, all right, we recorded for 4 hours, cut here. Now I got to record my outro. Now I got to splice it in. Now I got to realize the fan's off, and so the dynamic's completely different. Now, this one's in stereo. This is in mono. I got to splice this together. Now we're crossfade. You've added 4 hours to your day when you could have said, guys, can we just take 5 minutes, do an outro, do another intro, and get back into it? And most people are fine with that. So I would argue for things like that, that's why it's important to have your end product in mind, because the more of the stuff you can do just with your mouth, rather than like breaking into the Audacity, files and messing with sliders. That is going to be probably higher quality, at least for me, because I don't know what I'm doing and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's going to be a lot less of a time constraint on you.
Do you mean you don't like doing chains and macros for Audacity?
No.
It's so fun.
Yeah, also if you're recording online, make sure you're recording in a way that's multi-track recording, where everyone's voice is on a separate file. And ideally, if you want the A standard would be do that for online. I think Riverside, and there's a Discord bot called CraigBot that does that, and then also have everyone record local backup, and then you can sync them later. That's sort of the gold standard, but that's obviously a lot of work. But like some kind of multi-track thing where you can isolate tracks and cut things is so useful.
What was that Discord?
CraigBot. Yeah.
Or Alistair, which is their Patreon exclusive, slightly better one. Yeah, I wanted to make sure we shouted that out.
Yeah, it's like
it's like $1 a month.
Yeah.
It's extremely useful.
Yeah, Craig like the name, CRAIG.
Yeah, and it lets you download a lot of different formats, and there's a ton of things. There's Squadcast and Riverside, and Adobe has a podcast studio now. If you have a CC subscription, so there's lots of different solutions. But yeah, multi-track recording for sure.
Yeah.
Good question. Next question. All the way in the back first, and then we'll get you in the green.
So one of the things with my group, I'm afraid that some of them might lose interest in the whole. We were all in on doing the podcast thing.
Yep.
And I'm afraid some of them are like, I'm done.
Yep.
Is there any concern that I should be worried about, taking down recordings that they were in? Or...
Oh, okay. Well, those are two. Yeah. So there's two questions. One is dealing with players who just burn out or fade away and drop out, and then retroactively taking back you posted the episode publicly and they want you to take it down.
They haven't.
Or an episode that hasn't been posted yet. They say no.
It's for an episode to be posted.
Okay. Those are both very important concerns. Burnout for players or fade out from players, and scheduling problems. Yeah, that's a huge thing. Rob, you want? You didn't? Yeah.
No, you did. Okay. So that is the eternal problem with any campaign RPG play, just in a slightly new context. But so it's gonna happen. And accept the fact that you can't control what your players' lives are like. So
stop having children.
Like everybody else, factor that in what you're trying to produce. If you really want to record, a long campaign, it's like this continuous story with a lot of really great character development. That's awesome. But if somebody drops out of that, that's how the story goes. They're not in it anymore. So. Just like all RPGs are collaborative storytelling, if you got a cast member who ends up not in the game anymore for whatever reason, that's going to be part of your product now. There's no way to. What you do in response to that is keep going, basically. Don't let that ruin everything for everyone. Obviously, if your whole group, kind of collectively decides that they're not into the podcast anymore, you're going to have to deal with that and do something else. But But it's a thing that happens, and you just gotta get through it, really.
Yeah. No matter how continuous the story is, obviously, if you're just doing like little runs of episodes, trying out different games or whatever, you don't really need to worry about like, oh, how do we handle the absence of Dragthar the Barbarian? We're playing a different game now.
Yeah.
But I mean, the most recent episode of the Orpheus Protocol is episode 305, and there is one person in it who was in the first episode. So it can be done. Like, even if it is a continuous story, like those are just puzzles that you have to solve as like more as a director of a podcast, director of a narrative production than as a GM per se.
I got something to add.
Sure. Yeah.
Just that if that happens, honestly, I think it adds authenticity because that's the gaming experience.
Yeah, that is a gaming experience. I will say, in my experience too, longer running campaign. If you think about it, there's going to be X number of people who download episode 1 of a campaign, and then episode 2 is going to be X minus some percentage. And then episode 3 is going to be some percentage of episode 2 minus some percentage, right? Like, you're going to get dwindling interest. So I run campaigns. I ran a D&D campaign that was like 46 episodes long, and since then I've done I try to shoot for like 6 to like 20 episodes for a campaign. So that helps alleviate that problem because I can get new players for different campaigns. Now, for players who want to say, obviously you need their consent if you're going to post something publicly that they recorded. So, try to talk to them, figure out what the issue is, and see if you can deal with it so they can give the okay. But if they say no and you don't have a written agreement, like, that's the thing, if you're really concerned about that, you can have a written agreement saying, like, I give my consent to do this, and once you have their signature, that's, that's a tricky issue, and that's very dependent on the person, so it's hard to deal with. And obviously, if, a player does that, I'm like, well, obviously this is not working out with you. I'm not going to, do any more podcasts with you because I can't take that risk. I can't waste all this time and for you to pull, to do that. So, I can talk to you later if you have more, but that's such contextual, so context based.
I have it in the Discord where when someone joins the group, because they're already in our friend group, and it's just whether or not they want to be recorded or not. Yeah. I have them write a consent, but it's their Discord name. So.
Yeah. See, that's I don't think that's legally binding. Discord. Yeah. So one thing I do is also try and figure if you're running an AP podcast, it's obviously about the cast too. They're important, the players. And so I run one-shots or shorter length adventures to sort of figure out what this person's style of playing is and what your strengths are as a player. So if they flake out after 1 or 2 sessions, then maybe I shouldn't commit them to a 20 episode campaign. So kind of figure out who who your players are and get to know them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Luckily, we were already part of a big friend group, and we talked a lot. It's we should record this. Yeah. And it's I'll do it.
That's how it happens. Good question. I think you're next. Yeah.
Okay, how do you, if you have an ongoing actual play campaign that's going on and you want to start transferring it over to doing podcasts and everything, so did you have to set out the first mission to be able to transfer it over to the podcast format? Or doing the streaming stuff?
Okay, yeah, so the question is transitioning from an ongoing campaign to an actual play podcast. So you need some sort of trailhead, some sort of break-in point. So you need to record previously on, or here's the saga of blah 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 of our heroic adventurers. So you need to think about the listener and need to give them all the important context and kind of change the campaign to reintroduce things, important concepts and characters and plot elements. So
Are you talking about the technical question as well of going from YouTube content to podcast content?
Well, I was kind of more asking of how to both because there are some people who kind of like do like their live streams of their shows.
Sure,
like
from
podcast.
From like Twitch streaming to go doing that.
So if it's previously recorded in some format like Twitch, and live streaming is very different from podcasting because live streaming has the audience interaction stuff, which is very different from an actual play podcast where it's all recorded privately. I mean, it can be streamed, but so if you have streams, if you have that content saved, like you need to create some sort of summary highlight episode with like, here are the important bits, here are her protagonists, here's the conflict, here's the major story points, and do like a couple, like, I don't know, it depends on how much backstory there is to explain, but like, you need some kind of primer. Because you can't just introduce, well, they're in the dungeon of the irritated Minotaur. And he's really irritated about these things, and we all know that, right? And off they go, and we don't know why the Minotaur's irritated, so you need to have that. So does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely helps.
Okay. Great question. Yeah.
So editing, story arcs, home game, right? You said is very different from doing actual play.
Sure.
How do you handle that? Like switching from home game to something recorded. Right now, I'm recording just so I remember what the fuck I did.
Oh yeah.
Because I can't take notes while I'm editing.
That's
so
fair.
How does that change the structure? How much is it actually play now and not a little bit prescriptive?
So the question is, transitioning from running a home game to an actual play. So
Yeah, I'll cover. You got to give yourself a rating on how much you want this to be friends at the table versus how much you want to be the Magnus Archives with multiple people. And that is going to be an entirely different workflow and level of organization depending on what you want to do that. Now, that said, it doesn't have to be much. So, for instance, I podcast, and it is how I make the majority of my funds, and I'm very grateful for it. My goal was never to be a podcaster. I'm a writer. It's just that the things I write have to be tested multiple times across multiple people from multiple different backgrounds, and I have to do multiple revisions of every scenario I write, and I got to do a ton of research. So I am basically play testing, and the reason I podcast is because I want to use every part of the buffalo. Like, if people are willing to listen to me play a game and run a game, and they like it enough that they want to go buy the game I wrote, that is a good sign, and it's also a good advertisement for it. So as a result, I mean, I cut out table talk, I cut out things like that, but I leave in, like, I thought this part sucked, and because, like, that's literally why I'm there. Like, I want to know that, and I leave in.
I'm gonna let out the dog.
Yeah, I cut out that because it's not relevant. But like on Heaven on Games Open Design, like, I only post games that are broken and unfinished because I'm currently writing them. So like, I'm trying to craft a story, and the story can still be good, especially if I have good players I trust with. But like, the fact that, like, I don't understand how this rule works, or what do we do that again? Like, if it gets contentious and goes on and on and on, I will cut it down. But I don't like edit out and be like, actually, Rachel understood the mechanics perfectly because I wrote them wonderfully the first time and everything was perfect, because that's just not the product I go for. Because I do, hey, you want to see how the sausage gets made? Here's how the sausage gets made. But like, we're calling that actual play, and we're calling a totally scripted experience actual play.
Yes.
And like, you gotta seek. You got to cease looking for the way to do that whole broad spectrum. You gotta give yourself a slice and be like, well, I should probably make sure the dog doesn't keep interrupting every single recording, because no one likes that. But if the cat walked across the screen and everyone's like, oh, it's Mittens, and like everyone, and like the people in the chat are like, we need more Mittens content. Like,
Separate podcast.
yeah, you can leave that in because your people like it and it's enjoyable. Like, so yeah, it doesn't have to be studio quality for everything. But yeah, and here's the thing. You talk about like shifting your play at the table to actual play. One thing I've discovered after doing this many years and starting off merely just participating before I started doing it myself after learning from Ross, is that once you start the actual podcast, that is going to shift what you like to play. Like, it is going to bounce back. It is a circle. Like, now a complicated combat system, like, no. Like, you made a roll. Are you dead or did you do something cool? Like, I want it to be that apparent and immediate. I do not want anything with a grid that is no describing what's going on. Oh, you're on hex G6. Move to hex L7. Is everyone excited out there in Radio Land? Like, that is...
Look at this mini.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, so like I've really only played in actual play context for the majority of my knowing what an RPG is. But the longer go I on, like, there are systems that I'm just like, well, that seems like it would be fun. I'm never going to record it because that seems like it would be dog to listen to. I don't want that. Yeah, you do need to adjust some. I don't think it's as much as you think so, but if you do it for a while, I assure you that that is also going to adjust what you play, just because you're going to grow your own tastes, listen to your own voice.
I would also say just think about the time management of like how if your home game is like 6 hours, but it includes breaking in the middle for a meal and like, or, you know, getting the dog out, or, you know, you think about like, we sit down at 6 p.m. We play the good, you know, think about what the good parts are you want to make in the actual podcast, and just think about like how the evening goes out.
The shopping bits, and
then also for me, also the plot, the story stuff, like that's. Like in role-playing game, I think the greatest part is the improvised, the collaborative storytelling element where the GM no one at the table knows what the story is going to be because everyone has their own say.
Dice.
Yeah, there's dice. There's also the player, like, I'm going to go fight that shark. And like, no one predicted that.
But you're in full play.
Yeah, exactly. That's the good part. But yeah, just think about like how your evening goes, and like, you know, there's some groups I know that play for 12 hours on a Sunday, and like, okay, cool. You should not put 12-hour episodes up, you know, so. Right. Great question.
Thank you.
I have one thing to add. Something that can be useful in that regard is if you've got the same players for a fairly long time, if it's a group that you've been playing with for a while, you start to sort of get a sense of how many sort of prompts or offers the GM will give versus how long it takes to play through them. It's very different for different groups.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're planning on some sort of format where there are episodes that you're making, just try to structure your prep so that at the end of the number of offers that the GM makes that would produce an episode length amount of content, there should be some sort of twist, a climactic thing, a big question that's asked or something like that, so that you sort of naturally fall into, even if you play for 6 hours, well, shit, we made 6 episodes.
Right.
That's something that if you know the players well, you kind of get a pretty good reflexive assessment of, okay, if I set up this many scenes with this many problems for them to solve, they will approach it in such a way that it takes about this long.
Yeah, Carl will take 30 minutes, and we'll take 2 hours.
Just think about how long it takes you to do a fight or a role-playing scene, and like how many of how long you want your episodes to be, and that'll help you figure that out. Great question.
Had a podcast for a few years, gotten pretty comfortable, and for the most part enjoy the process. Small but loyal listener base, and don't have any grandiose plans, but want to grow it to some extent. And the absolute black hole to me still is the marketing idea, and what is worth the time to put in, what avenues.
Yeah.
That's.
The question is about marketing a podcast, and I sympathize with you because it changes rapidly. Like, I would recommend Jack Conte, the CEO of Patreon, gave a speech recently, I think for South by Southwest. I forgot the name of it, but he talks about the history of the internet and social media, how like the invention of social media, then the creation of subscriptions and follow buttons, and now in the 2020s you have TikTok with the For You button, which removes. I mean, it's what the algorithm wants to give you, not the creators you want to follow, and like it's an uphill battle for any creator to maintain a following. So
the social media promotional space post Twitter is about as bad as it's ever been.
Yeah.
Which, just to be frank about it.
So one thing is just persistence, just staying out there. One sort of that's the closest thing to an evergreen rule would be crossover.
Cross promotion.
Yeah, cross promotion. You guest on their podcast, and then they guest on yours, and you put links and stuff like that, and that works. The two things I found recently that have helped are audiograms. Audiograms are basically taking a good little clip of your show. Like, I'm going to go punch the orc. Don't punch the orc. I'm going to punch the orc, and then like whatever a funny 2-minute thing is. And there are websites and tools to make it into a video clip you can put on social media platforms. Headliner.app is one, but there's a bunch of others. If you just type in audiogram creator, you can, get an idea of it. And
you definitely want to subtitle that.
Yeah, put in captions and that kind of thing. The second thing is putting your podcast on YouTube. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. YouTube now has a way to grab an RSS feed and put it on there. And it's just a static image with the audio playing, but that's something. And you can create videos with little waveform animations and other stuff and episode artwork. But YouTube has 1 billion people on it, and if you have a good title and good descriptions, people oh, you're playing this system, you're doing that. So that'll help. So those are 3 things you can try. Ethan, do you have anything?
No, because we don't know. We're actually the real answer for us is that we are not really trying to grow at the moment. This is one of these things go for your goals. If you're looking for growth, then start expending effort on that. And the only thing I would add to what Ross says is. When you are writing the algorithm, whether that's on TikTok bits or Facebook or the remains of Twitter or YouTube, you never know what's going to hit because it's pretty opaque to us.
Well, the rules keep changing too.
Yeah, they change it all the time,
and it's different for each platform.
Yeah, it's different. So the only rule is if you want, you have to be there. You have to be in it to win it, and you're playing the lottery maybe. But if you're on as many platforms as you can, you're rolling the dice on an algorithm, and maybe you'll hit it at some point.
I will caution as a guy who's tried to grow multiple podcasts and failed and succeeded in various ways. I would be super skeptical of anything that might be considered traditional marketing. Hey, give me $10,000 and I'll show a banner ad for your podcast that every ad blocker will block on Board Game Geek. Yeah. And you too can set a bunch of money on fire like you did Facebook pivot to video. You're going to get more traction out of a headliner audiogram or hey, this was once premium content on my Patreon 4 years ago and no one's going to care if I put it out for free now to give people a taste. That will get you more traction than a million targeted ads and whatever social media feed you're going to be paying.
Flyers.
Hand flyers.
Or postcards at cons. By the way, we have such lovely postcards. Yeah.
So for instance, this is a better marketing for me and everybody up here than if I ran a game.
Yeah.
If I ran a game, I'm talking to 6 people. Yep. I'm doing that for 4 hours. My voice is dying. This is a bigger ROI. And I also didn't pay an enormous amount of money to a person that does this all day for bigger marketing tools. So that would be my main worry about. Anything you can do to promote is good, but if you're burning cash to do it, because that is a bad idea. Yeah.
It occurs to me also, if you make an actual play podcast, something you should just emotionally prepare yourself for is a cascade of infinite bullshit emails promising you that your podcast will make a lot of money if you just give me some money now. Just get the muscle memory ready to delete that shit.
Oh yeah, kick spam, view Kickstarter, I'll fix it, brother, and just bing 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 bing.
Yeah, great question. It's a struggle, and that's one of the parts that I don't like, but you got to do it. It sucks. The hat. Yes.
One thing I found recently is that Facebook groups specifically, I know it's kind of you got to find the right things on the right days to promote certain things.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of groups out there that I found that you can self-promote much different things, and within the first time I did that, within a first week, I got 50 extra downloads per episode of whatever I was putting out there at the time.
Yeah, so Facebook groups are good. So also Discord. A lot of Discord channels. There's a lot of Discords for targeted RPG audiences, and a lot of them have self-promotion channels, and I've used those. And it's similar to kind of doing like crossovers with other podcasts. It's like finding a target audience that's going to respond really well to your show, and being like an actual human to them, and being like, here, I've done something cool. Now, I also admit I have done in the past episodes of RPPR actual play based on something that was popular at the time. Like I did a Rick and Morty one-shot using monsters and other childish settings, and people liked it, and people found the show that way. I did like a video game called Inscription, a video game art type book called Vermis, like other things, and so... there's nothing wrong with that if that's part of your show is doing one shot. So like being topical, you're doing new games, like covering new games. If you're the first kid on the block with the hot new 40K RPG actual play or whatever it is you like, that could help too. So it can't hurt. I mean, probably. Great question. Yes?
So I've been on a podcast for about a year now, and in that year, things may go pretty well, but our production and audio quality has gotten substantially better as it has gone on. But a lot of people's first entry point is when the first episode where we're kind of scraping by with whatever we can get away with and stuff. Do you have any recommendations on how to have a better first impression?
So the question is having a better first impression when your first episodes are not as technically polished as your current episodes. Yeah, because as you do the show, you're going to learn how to like record and edit better and find better tools and techniques to help you, and that makes sense. I think that goes in part like think about like your long campaigns. Like with RPPR, I've always, personally, I also just like as much as I like any one RPG, there's so many others to try out. So I like maybe create a new like campaign and like you can start here. If you're really hardcore and you're bored, go to the older stuff. But here, this is the good stuff,
framing going to the early rougher episodes as a hardcore gamer challenge will probably engage something sick in your audience. Probably successful in that way.
Yeah. So I don't even recommend like the stuff we did in the early years just because they're older. And so I would. Is your show just one long campaign?
Currently.
Okay, yeah. So I would create some sort of like conclusion and create a new jumping in point. Because like big shows like Critical Role and Dimension 20, they do that too, where they're like, here's our new story arc. It doesn't even have to be, it could be in the same campaign setting, be like, you can start here, and create a page or an entry on your website that says like, start here. And I think that would be your best bet is, because otherwise you're talking about going to your old files and remastering them, and don't do that. It's so much more work.
Yeah. You can also just do like a 10 to 15 minute, hey, if you want to catch up on our story, here's what happened in the last arc. Like little summaries. I mean, it's writing something out and talking in a microphone by yourself in a room, but there are audio files that like there's a minimum level of quality where they won't listen to you if they hear the certain type of click or a certain or and if you've upped your game since then, you can get them on board. It's best to okay, here's a little summary starter to get you above the hump, so you're not listening to stuff that you're not going to be able to tolerate. And now you're back with us as we march down the content list, because you will be absolutely amazed the speed at which people consume a backlog once they decide to get hooked into something.
It's nice, but slightly terrifying to be like, a person like, hi, you're my new hyperfixation. I listened to 200 hours of your stuff in the last 2 months. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Very good question. Any other? In the back again.
What is your recommended length of time for a session? If everyone's on board, everyone keeps it, fairly clean, not a lot of meandering off and wandering off.
So with Caleb, so the question is, what's your ideal session length, not the episode length?
Well, it'd actually be the episode length.
The episode length. There's definitely a lot of different approaches. Like some shows do like an hour long, or even 45 minutes long. With RPPR, it's usually 2 to 4 hours per episode, but I would post 6-hour episodes because I was dumb back then. So I would say between 1 and 4 hours. It depends on the type of show too, because like we do a lot of like Call of Cthulhu historical material, and we'll have like someone like Adam Scott Glancy who will like it's a 4-hour game and 3 hours of it are a lecture to give you context about what's going on. Here's how submarines work in World War I. 3 hours later, okay, let's roll some dice. And so, yeah, think about like, what I wouldn't do over 4 hours for sure, but like 1 to 4 hours, depending on the type of show you want to do. Caleb, any thoughts?
Yeah, again, if you're editing in the microphone, your session length and your episode length do not have to be the same. So if you typically play longer than the average attention span of a podcast listener, just do an intro, do another outro, do an outro, do another intro, and get back into it. And you've taken up 5 minutes of your session, and you're just plugging along, and it's normally fine. And also, that can actually genuinely help the game. Like when I take an act break at hour and a half in of a game, everyone gets a bathroom break, and I do an intro to like, okay, last time on, even though we just did it a few seconds ago, you'll be amazed about how many times the player's like, oh, a clue that I saw 30 minutes ago and completely forgot. That is utterly vital to the resolution. Just because I did a little like, well, Jeff did this last time. So like it can, you have a lot more flexibility in that than you might initially think.
All right, Rob, what do you go for on Orpheus?
Well, this is very sort of individualized, but it depends a little bit on your player group and what kind of real-life, boring adult responsibilities they have. Because, like, I would love to sit there and play long enough to make 2 or 3 episodes, but that's kind of a long-term pipe dream of mine. It's almost always like, well, we can sit down for long enough to make 1 episode. And so figuring out like what is reasonable to ask of your players is also a good way into figuring out what session length ought to be. I've developed a sixth sense for this much recorded material cooks down in editing to this much of an episode at the production quality that I like to make. And if we don't have twice that much time, I just cut it off at the end of when we have 1 good episode worth of material. And the not having time for 2 is a 98% proposition at this point because the world is crazy.
You can always record new intros and outros and be like previously on, and like you can do that later too. Just it's not as great as like doing it in the session like Caleb was talking about, but it's better than nothing. Ethan, how long does Tech Div go?
Well, much like Rob, we got people with kids and early bedtimes. So we have a recording schedule that works for us really well. We actually schedule all of our sessions like a month in advance so that people can know when they're going to be available for what they're not going to be available for. And we generally have about 2 to 2.5 hours in any recording block. And we basically just almost always we release each session as its own episode. We don't break them up very much, but we also don't record really long things. And over time, we just sort of found a pace that works really well for us. So,
Right now, my players complain sessions aren't long enough, so it was just more of a question on the episodes.
I think if they're doing that, like I would go with like what Caleb was talking about and just record 2 sessions worth, like do a 10-minute break in between, and just go and pretend it's a new and pretend like you're just starting again, and like, do a new intro, and that way you get 2 episodes in 1 session, and then like the players, everyone's happy.
If a player told me that, I would make them regret it. Like, oh baby, here comes the backlog.
Yeah, Caleb runs,
we're going all day, and I'm going to take a couple months off. Yeah.
Caleb runs Delta Green, which is the MO of that.
I'll take you as long as you'll stand it. Yeah.
But yeah, we're at 50 minutes. There's probably a group outside.
One quick one. You said at the beginning, don't do this as your day job and try and pay the bills. How many people do you get before you start seeing any income?
It really. So the question is, how many listeners do you need before you get an income? So there's two routes with income, really. One is advertising. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways of doing that. And that's when you need the big numbers, and those numbers change. Yeah, well, like thousands of listeners per episode, usually, like thousands of downloads. The second thing is through Patreon, which can obviously be a lot lower in terms of raw numbers, but you have to get people to sign up and pay a monthly or some kind of subscription fee.
And then put goodies behind that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, bonus. So, like RPPR gets like 360 or 350, 360 patrons, and that's pretty good. And so it really depends. Advertising is something I've not really messed with because I've been very fortunate with Patreon. So it's how engaged they are. Like there's a guy, Kevin Kelly, the 1,000 true fans. If you have 1,000 true fans, they each give you $100 a year. You can make a great living with that. So it's that you don't need a lot of people, but they need to be really passionate about it. So you can have a lot of kind of listeners or a small number of really passionate listeners. So yeah.
Yeah, and when we say don't do it for a living, that is not, I think it's enormously rewarding. It's a great job. I love doing this. But like just promotionally, you are going to have to do most of it for free or at a loss. And you're going to have to do that for years. I taught full-time 4 years in a public school before it even got close to making a full-time job out of it. And at some point you can transition if you want to, but the reason they say like don't make it a full-time job at the outset is because you're going to need food, you're going to need rent way before you get the number of people that can make you pivot. And what that number is going to depend on, do you own a house? Do you have kids? Where you live? What's the, those are all like really material concerns. You should be doing your best practices to grow your brand and get people to listen to you so that when you do get that number and you can pivot if you want to, you do that. But like by no means being like, shove it, boss, I'm an actual play podcaster now.
That's an actual play right there. I'm going to play out for you.
That would not be a wise choice.
This is kind of like the closest thing to like the secret to my success that I could really share. There's a sort of herd mentality when people look at the landing page for a Patreon. Which is like, okay, so here's a new actual play podcast. It has 4 episodes out, and it has $16 a month that it's bringing in. There is an automatic association of low value in the human mind looking at that. Like, people don't think this is worth money. Even though that's not true, people will think that way. So the way that I did it, and I strongly do recommend this, is like, the show that I made was free for just over a year, never asked for money, never talked about a Patreon, put out as much good quality content as I could until I saw that there was enough activity, not as much in like the Twitter follows or whatever, but like the Discord. People were there every day talking to each other, forming friendships, stuff like that. And at that point, I decided, okay, now I will launch a Patreon concurrent with sort of a blitz of cross-promotion on other podcasts and things like that. Because my thought was, much like a Kickstarter, Patreon is a crowdfunding endeavor. And you'll get people hooked in this idea of like, this is a successful thing. The herd has decided that this is of value. So if your first day numbers on a Kickstarter are great, that predicts success for the Kickstarter. Same thing with Patreon. You don't want a Patreon that you launch and you're promoting on every episode that's doing tiny numbers, because that will actually like turn people off to it no matter how good your product is. So like make sure that you are sort of like landing your cross promotions and engaging a community that exists and stuff, so that when you get onto Patreon, you at least have a pretty good number quickly, because that perception of success leads to more success.
Very excellent point. We need to stop because we don't want to be those guys. I assume.
One quick question.
Yeah.
I'll get in the hallway.
Yeah, we'll get in the hallway.
Yeah, we gotta cut down
also,
the recording.
RPPR live tonight at Marriott Tennessee Room at 8 p.m. We can talk more. I'll be recording Role Playing Public Radio, we'll have some couple fun things.
Thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate it.